My name is Lisa Shea, and today we'll be doing a fairy bottle rocket. This started because I was doing Inktober 2020, and one of the day's prompts was rocket, and I thought about a bunch of different ways that I could approach the prompt of rocket, and I decided I would do a bottle rocket that was taking fairies on some sort of adventure. So I painted it, and then when I was done with Inktober, I decided to auction off all of the paintings I made to support a battered women's shelter. This is my cat coming to take a drink of the clean watercolor water before we get started. So I auctioned off all the paintings, and my uncle bought this particular painting, and I sent it off in the USPS mail, and it never arrived. Somehow between our house and his destination, the bottle rocket went missing. So now I'm going to have to try to repaint the bottle rocket. And as you might know, it's very challenging to make another copy of something because the way you feel about the subject has changed and the exact mixing of the colors is different and all sorts of other reasons. But we're going to take a shot. And I think my uncle will generally be happy with whatever I send him because he's that kind of a warm, compassionate person. So we'll do our best bet at making a beautiful bottle rocket for him. Alright, so hopefully the cat is now done. Oh, the cat has to nuzzle at the cable a little bit. You know, the whole reason I put this phone up on this clamp mount was so the cats weren't knocking the tripod over. But now they have a new way of causing trouble for the world. Alright, so he's had his water, so he's alright. So what we're going to use for this is I have watercolor paints in a tin. I do this because I can choose the watercolor colors that make me very happy and work with those easily. And then when I run out, I don't have to throw away the whole set like you might with a pre-made pan set. I just put more water in here from a tube. So the watercolors come in tubes. You buy the colors that you want, you put them in there, and you have a custom set. And these last forever. They get dry, that's fine. You make them wet again, so it's not like they go bad. Got some water. I got a pencil to draw my initial work. I'm looking at. So you rarely want to use the eraser that comes with the pencil. You want to use an external eraser because that one tends to just leave marks and not erase very well. I have a waterproof pen. The one that I happen to use is a Jelly Roll 06 Sakura, but it doesn't matter which brand you use whichever brand you want. Just make sure it's waterproof because we're going to be putting water on this and we don't want the water to smear the pen around. And then whatever brush you want. I have a whole set of brushes, but a lot of them are for specific uses like these flat ones or the angled ones or so on. In general, I paint with just one brush, which is just a standard little round shape. And yes, my hands are shaky, so that adds a little challenge to what I do, but that's okay. We all have our different challenges in life. Alright, so we're going to start with the drawing process. I always draw in pencil first, because that way you can erase if you make mistakes and fix things. Alright, bottle rocket. So the idea for this theme was the word rocket, and I'm going to turn this sideways for a minute. Let me just make sure that that can be seen. Yep, just the angle that I'm sitting at will make this easier for me to draw. Alright, so on one hand I want it to be reasonably close to the other one, but on the other hand I don't want to just copy it because that makes it challenging. So let's draw a bottle first. So a bottle has a lip on the top. Alright, that's a good lip. Has a neck. Very delicate neck. Now the first bottle I had done had sort of a round with an indent in it, and I think it came out a little too much looking like a bottom. So I think I'm going to do a much smaller, that indent's called a punt, and it's there for the stability of the bottle. So I think I will do a much smaller punt of this bottle. But I still like this sort of bulbous shape. we'll make a bulbous shape and then just a little indent. So the challenge is, for me, making it symmetrical, and I do want it to be more bulbous, so it'll come out, and this is where having the eraser is good, because then when you get one side to be better, and you can just erase off the other side and get the other side to be better. And then you say, okay, I do like how it's rounded over here better, so we're going to fix this side. Alright, so now I say I actually like that better. So it's a process. That is fine. You are working out what you want this thing to look like. A little, alright, we'll fix that. We'll just redo it now. It's going to squarish. And just slope shoulder. Slope shoulder. There we go. That's more of what I'm thinking. Alright, I like in this bottom area. This points out that it's good to get reasonable quality in your paper. Because if you had really inexpensive paper, then it could be all this erasing and redrawing, and then even when we get to the watercoloring stage, all the painting and repainting and stuff could end up damaging the paper because it's not meant to hold up for it. So you want a reasonably good paper so that while you're doing all this sort of work to get it the way that you want it to, that the paper holds up to all this activity. Alright, that's a little rough. I see my hand's a little shaky, so it makes this a challenge, but we'll get there. Alright, that's better. Well, like I said, we all have challenges, and life goes on. Life is just that way, and you do the best with what you have. Alright, I am pleased with that shape of a bottle. It brings to mind the kind of pumpkin-y kinds of bottles that they have that have those ridges in them. So I think I may do that. Alright, so got the bottle. Alright, so next we have a stick that a rocket is on. So we'll work on getting the stick in here. So the stick, if you think about a stick, well, I got a pencil. If you think about a stick leaning in the bottle, it's going to lean about like that. And it's got fairly straight sides, but my style in general, as you can see, is to not worry too much about that sort of thing. So we do want it reasonably straight. So if it hits there, it will be about like that. Oh, come on, stay still. See, this is the challenges of a shaky hand. It's all there. We will get there. About up to there. And then you draw a parallel line. This is the stalk that the bottle rocket sits on. Alright, so we'll do like to that. There we go. Well, if you have shaky hands, then just keep going forward with the things you want to do. Then it may not be exactly the way that you might have envisioned them, but there'll be some way to get things done. Alright, so we've got the bottle stick part done. And I know it's light for you on the camera right now, but once we retrace it in pen, you'll be able to see it much better. Alright, so now we need the rocket part. So the rocket goes here and goes up pretty close to this, and has a rockety nose. Alright, so we got the rocket. The rocket has little clamps by which it is held on to that stick. Alright, it's got the fuse. Alright, so far so good. And now we've got the passenger bubble. Alright, so now in that bubble we've got 5 passengers and little chairs. Alright, and I think rather than drawing the actual people in the chairs with the pencil and then trying to trace them in pen, I will just do those in pen. Oh, and I suppose I can draw the horizon. Normally you don't want the horizon to exactly split the screen. But I also don't want the horizon to interfere with any of these main things that we've got. Well, maybe I'll drop the horizon a little. Now see, the problem is it could be that something about this balance is what my uncle had really liked before, and any sorts of changes I start to make now could be ones that he says, oh, but I really liked it the way it was before. But hopefully this isn't a bad change. Before I had the horizon exactly splitting the screen, which in general you don't want to do, but I just made that choice because it came across the middle of the space there. But I'm going to drop it down to head towards the more traditional thirds when you're doing a composition of the scene. Alright, so that's the pencil part of the drawing. So now I'm going to get to the pen and ink. My cat is coming over again to say hello. Yes, you are a very good kitty. Very good kitty. You can take a look now before I get to the watercoloring stage, because you're not going to cause much trouble for pencil. Alright, sweetie, you can't actually sleep right there right now, though. I know, you want to be a help. And you are such a good kitten. Such a good kitten. Alright, sweetie. You need to go on this side. Come on, sit on the mouse pad. Look, it's a very nice mouse pad. Alright, so now we're going to draw in the pen and ink for the bottle. There we go. You will probably find, as you draw things, that it makes more sense for you to turn the paper to draw them in a way which is easiest for your hands, rather than trying to keep the paper at the exact same angle and twisting your hands around into unnatural angles to get to them. So this makes it a little sad for time lapses, because it's cool with a time lapse when you can just watch something developing in the exact same orientation as you go. But, you know, you have to do what is best for the finished artwork. It also depends on how my hands are doing. If my hands are being fairly shaky like they are right now, then I take better care of them. If they were doing a little better, then I might contort them into more angles. Okay. So think about where things are being impacted by other aspects of your drawing. So like that is inside the bottle, but then it comes in front of this lip right there. Alright. And we got now let's do the rocket first. So we got the rocket, which is connected to it. Kitten. Okay, and I can't see what I'm doing if you're sitting right on top of my painting. And then, sweetie. I know. Poor kitten wants to be a part of everything. Kitten does not understand why kitten cannot come participate in the painting process. It's hard to be a kitten. Alright, so now we're putting the little connectors on between the rocket and the stick. So you have to be a little careful. This ink goes on wet. You know, we tend to think of ink as dry, and back in the Middle Ages when they worked with ink, it went on really wet, and they had to be super careful not to smear it. In modern times, the ink dries really quickly in comparison. But it still goes on wet because it's coming out of the tube. So you have to be careful right when you first put it down that you do not rest your hand or other body parts in it, because you could smear it. Alright, so now we've got the passenger area. We put in the little chairs. Alright, so now to put in the little people. And now granted, you know, they're teeny, so you can't really see them. And my hands are shaky, so I can't put in too much detail. But I do want to put in little heads and the bodies. Little legs. Alright, now we've got 5 little peoples in our bubble. I'll put the horizon line in. You might ask why I leave the perforation on, and it's just something I love. It's like when I work with film photography, I love having the sprocket area from the side of the film in the picture. It's just part of the overall construction of the piece that makes me happy. And some people, when they frame it, frame that off, and some people frame it in, so I suppose it gives them the choice. Alright, so we're going to add some little flowers over here on the side. It's important to remember when someone frames one of these, they could have a mat on the side, so don't put anything important over here like the secret little cat or something. If you put it over on the side, it could be covered by the mat. So try to keep most of your stuff in towards the more center of the piece. Alright. Alright, I think that is the bottle shape, and I definitely like it better this way with less of the big hunts, is what it's called, indentation in the middle, where it looks less like a bottom sitting. Alright, so the rest of this is now going to be watercolor. Alright, so a key with watercoloring is that when the paper is wet, colors will flow in that wet area. And therefore, if you have 2 different areas which are wet and which are touching, colors will flow between the wet areas. Anywhere that is wet causes a flow to happen. So you generally want to paint an area, let it dry before you paint anything adjacent to it, so that you don't have images, colors being drawn in between the different areas. So my friend Scott Nelson always recommends to paint the background first and then paint the key parts. So we will use the Scott Nelson method. So we will start with the sky, which is blue. And I want it to seem blue with sort of white clouds. And in watercolors, white is achieved by the white of the paper that you're painting on. So I'm going to do blue, but I'm not going to paint the blue very thickly so that white shows through, and that white will end up being the gentle clouds. And then I'm going to do green trees and stuff along the horizon there in the distance. So I should be able to put the green on top of the blue. In general, watercolors you see through, so that if you do layers upon layers, if you put blue down and then red down, you would see through both of them and it would be purple. But the green should still be strong enough to be able to block out the blue that it's on top of. Alright, so we're going to start by doing this wet on wet, which means we're going to make this paper wet. And hold on, let me get some cardboard under here so that I do not get the table itself all painted. My cat is sitting right here watching every move and interfering with my paintbrush arm, but that's okay. Cat just wants to be a help. Alright, so we're just putting water down here right now, and that's to give the paint a place to move around and do things. I like that kind of loose feeling for backgrounds because it gives a soft, gentle, fuzzy feel to it. Alright. Alright, that done. Now note that with oil paints, things can take up to a week to dry, so you have plenty of time to work on things. But with watercolors, this could dry within 5 minutes, especially right now that it's winter and the house has a very low humidity. Things dry just super quickly. So you want to move with reasonable haste so that the stuff you're doing, this wet area, keeps being able to do its sort of wet, swirly stuff. Alright, so that's at least a start. It's already starting to dry. Put more water in here. Alright, so we're going to go with one of my favorite colors, which is a cerulean blue. Alright, so see how, if I just sit for a second, see how the blue is sort of moving out into the wet area? Then you would think of it, if you had a glass of water and you dropped a drop of food coloring into it, the food coloring wouldn't stay still, it would move out into the glass of water. And that's exactly what these watercolor paints are doing. They're moving out into this wet area that they have access to. They won't swirl out into the dry area because there's no water there to suck them along with it. But they will move out into this wet area. Alright. Let's move on this side. Alright, turn this around. Since we made a little extra challenging by this cat that is immediately next to me and wanting to watch everything I'm doing. But that's okay. It is just in her kitty nature to want to be involved. And that is fine. But you see how there's like some white areas and some blue areas? And I like that. It gives that sense of a dappled, cloudy sky, which makes me very happy. It's worth noting that watercolors dry later than they look when they are wet. So all of this will be a lighter color. That is fine. And also, watercolors in general work on the concept of layers. So you put on a layer of watercolors, you let it dry, you add in a few more layers, and in all these layers you're seeing down through to the lower layers, and that gives it that nice glowing stained glass kind of feel to it. Alright. so I think I've gotten blue sky. Alright, it's a little darker over there, so we're going to add a little more paint over here. So it's the exact same color of paint, but as I put more of the same color on, it starts to look darker because I am blocking access to the white paper beneath it. That makes it look darker and darker. Alright. Alright, so I think that the sky area looks pretty much the way that I want it to. Again, I like the way that it looks dappled. That you've got these cloudy things up here. Yeah, I am pretty happy with that. Now I can't start working on this lower area yet, because if I put water down here and it touched the water up there, it would become one big water area, and now the blue would flow down into the green, and the green would flow up into the blue, and that would be less than useful. Right, Kitten? Kitten is trying to help. So what we're going to do is wait a minute or two for this to dry. I can't work on the green down here. I can't work on the bottle because the bottle is up here. I can't work on the stick or the rocket, so there is very few things I can work on right now because of the construction of this shape. You know, one could say I could work on the flowers because the flowers are wholly obtained, but I want to work on the green of the bottom beforehand. Right, so we'll just wait a few minutes for this to dry. Alright, so we are back, and the sky is now dry, which means it's safe to work on all these other things. So next I'm going to do the other big swath of background, which is the ground. And so once again, I'm going to paint this all wet, and if I had done this while the sky was wet, then when I came up here next to the sky, it would have created one gigantic wet area, and the green would have flowed into the blue, and the blue would have flowed into the green, which would have not been the intention that I had for those. But now that the blue is dry, then things that I put into the green will move around in this green wet area without impacting that upper blue area. So I don't have to worry about the stalks, because the stalks will be in a dark green, and that'll go right over the lighter green that I use for this. But I'm going to try to avoid the little flower areas, because the flowers will be red, and I don't want the red of the flowers to have to see through the green of the grass and end up being some sort of a red-green, muddy, gray color. So again, with watercolors, it's good to remember that everything in general is see-through. And what you put on one layer is going to be able to be seen through to the lower areas that you paint in that same spot. And that is great when you're making something that has lots of shades of colors. It makes a really pretty effect. But if you have something like a red flower on top of a green field, you want to paint just the red flower red and paint the green field around it green. It's not like acrylics or oils or other systems where you can paint the underlayer all green and then paint things on top of it and not see through it. In watercolors, you do see through things. Alright, so we're going to go with my favorite green, which is a fern green, which is this one here. Oh look, the cat is back. Hello, cat. I know you like to help. You are just so helpful. So the cat is laying down right at the end of my brush, trying to eat the end of my brush while I am painting, because the cat is just so helpful. You are just so helpful. See, and then she nuzzles it. So I have enough problems with my hands being shaky. Never mind with cats actively nuzzling paintbrushes while I am painting a design. Right, sweetie? She just wants some love and affection, and that is all right. Sweetie? You're a very good kitten. Very good kitten. So now I'm trying to paint with the cat right here next to me, eating the brush while I am trying to carefully paint around the edge of the bottle. You are so helpful. And you might be able to see with the blue that there is a little bit of directionality that you can see with the brush strokes. So in general, when you're painting things like sky, sweetie, right here, chew it a little. Get this chewing out of your mind. See? Isn't that fun to chew? Alright, thank you. Now, back to the painting. So you want to generally go left to right in sky-related things, unless you're trying to make, a bubbling mass of clouds. And the same thing with grounds. Generally, horizons go off fairly horizontally into the distance. So you want to, in general, go with sort of a left to right shape, because while it is not really obvious what direction the brushes are going when you're painting wet on wet like this, there's still some sort of a sense of which way the world is going. Generally I want it a little darker on the bottom, and the way to get it darker with the same color is to put on the paint heavier, because it blocks the access of the light to the paper more, and that ends up making it darker because you're getting less of the white coming through. So that then creates this shadow beneath the bottle. Over here, around the little flowers. There's a little brush here and there, but I don't have to, well, might as well, I got it out. You don't have to worry about those in general while you're painting, because you can just brush them out at the end. They don't get stuck in the paint, because this paint is fairly thin. So if you get cat hairs or brush hairs or other things in there, don't worry, you can just brush them off at the very end. Alright, so now we've mostly got the background of the ground in place. So that is set. So I'm going to now, since the blue is dry in the sky, I'm going to paint some little trees. And I'm going to go with more of a blue-green color. I think maybe this green over here. And these are just sort of little rough things in the background. So they don't need to be very precise or specific. And I don't mind that the green is wet and that it's going to bleed a little into the green, because that'll give it more of an organic feel. No, don't touch, don't touch. Oh, sweetie. Alright. There's the little cat help. So you can see what happens when you put cat paws in something while it's still wet. You are such a help, sweetie. Now let's say that you wanted to try to fix out that it spread quite so much. You could get your brush very clean and then mostly dry it off so it's damp. And now if you go in here, you're acting sort of like a sponge and you're lifting out the color, so it's not quite so obvious. But again, I don't mind it coming down a little bit into the green down here, because it gives it that sense that this is not a hard edge of a horizon. It's just where the forest line is beginning, which is fine. And there's a cat here and there, but that's fine. It just brushes off. Alright. Alright, so we want a bright red for the rocket. I think, look at my choices, I'm going to go with the crimson, which is right here. I have a key set up in here actually. I'll show you the key. So all I did was take a piece of watercolor paper, make a grid, and then paint each color into one of the spots, and I painted it darker on the top and then lighter at the bottom to give a sense of what the colors look like when they dry at the different levels of thickness. So it's good to make yourself a key for whatever colors you use. It's quick and easy to do, and it comes in very handy. Alright, so we're going with, just fix it. Going with the crimson. I'm painting the rocket. You can see even here how it looks different depending on how light or dark it is. And also keep in mind that it will lighten as it dries. So if there's areas that already look too light, like down in here, you want to make that a little darker, or you can just go in again and make a second layer on top of it once it dries to add in more darkness. I'm just going to make it darker now. So now we have the green grass dry and the blue sky dry. So now we're able to work. We'll put the flowers in because those are pretty standalone little objects, and those will be in the same crimson that we just worked with. Color splotches. Right. So I want to do the brown stick next because that's going to be in the bottle, and I want the bottle to look like it's on top of the stick because, you know, the stick is in the bottle and then the bottle curves out around it. So we're going to start with the brown of that stick, which I think shall be this brown, which is burnt sienna. It's actually also burnt sienna to the left of it, but that's a Marie's burnt sienna and that's a Reeves burnt sienna. So it shows that the exact same color name from different vendors can look fairly different from each other. And the stick is under those latches, or whatever you want to call them, that hold the rocket to the stick. So I'm not going to paint those sections brown. Alright, so we've got the stick painted now. But we need that to dry before we start painting the rocket, because if we started painting while that was wet, then we'd just be smearing that brown around, and we want the brown to look like it's staying pretty still. So the red is still wet from the rocket, the brown is still wet from the stick. So it would be dangerous to try to paint the yellow, but what we could do is paint the people inside, because you want the yellow to go over on top of the people, and it would be sort of subtle, but that's okay. So we're going to paint the people. I just painted them sort of grays the first time around. I'm looking at the rest of these colors. I think I will paint them. What do you think? How about a purple? They're going to be tiny anyway, so it'll be hard to see them. Right, so we have to do this without touching anything else on the paper. Alright, so we've got the little fairies painted in. And we need them fully dry before we paint the yellow, because any sort of painting motion that we do on top of them is going to end up smearing them, and we don't want them to smear. So now we are back to the state of letting things dry for a little while, so that we get the insides of those dry before we paint yellow on top of it. So we have both the stick and the red dry before we try to paint those metal clamps that hold it on. And definitely we want the stick fully dry before we start working on the bottle itself. So we're going to have a little more drying time in here. And I will note that you should never leave your brush sitting in the thing of water, because that'll loosen the glue that holds it in. So always leave the brush out in either sideways or point up in a container like this, so that the brush end itself is not damaged. Alright, so we're back. The top area of the stick is still wet and the rocket is still wet, but this bottom area is nice and dry. So now we can start working on the bottle. And the bottle is going to take a number of layers to get it to look the way that I want it to look. So we have to think of this project in terms of layers, not in terms of putting something down and having it done. So the color I'm going to go with this is the deep green, I think. I don't know, a deep green or the Viridian. I think I may do the Viridian, which is the one over here to the far left. Those greens may look reasonably close to each other, but they have subtle differences. Alright, so we're going to start up at the top and do, well, actually, since I just got the brush in here, we'll do the edges first. Because when you first put a brush into paint, it's going to have most paint on it. So it'll be the darkest. So we want it to be shadowed on the left and on the right. And it's going to glisten off of the brighter edges there. It'll be darker down along the bottom. Down in here. And then we'll drag this out because we don't want hard edges here. This is a glass three-dimensional object. So we do want it darker in areas, but we don't want there to be sharp lines because this is in a square. So we're pulling this out. Now that we've got a little lighter, some more darkness in here, more darkness down here. We'll do this top area, which will be the lightest of all. And that stick where it comes out will not be crossed by the green because that is free of the green. But this stick below that lip, everywhere, is going to have the green over it. So everywhere, let's try it this way, everywhere from that point down, it's going to have this green over it. Right, so see how now that the green is, or the stick is dry, that brown is not smearing when we paint. The green is going over the top of it, but not dragging the brown color out of its shape, which is what we're after. We only have a brush hair over here, but that's alright. We'll just deal with that later. So again, we want to think about the directionality of our brush strokes. The glass is going to be sort of this sweeping horizontal shape, and we're just putting down layers right now. The edge we can paint. A little nook. I think that the back lip can be a little darker. Then remember, things lighten as they dry, so sometimes it takes a couple layers to get it to the darkness that you want. The lip itself will be a little darker because it will tend to be a little thicker than the rest of the glass. Just tap along there. This lip here will be a little darker, and it will be a little thicker. The left side will be more in the shadow. This side will be more in the shadow. Alright, so we're building these layers. We want to do this softly. We don't want sharp edges in any of these layers because this is a three-dimensional piece of glass, not something that has sharp edges on it. So there's also this sense of the curve of the glass coming around like this. A little more green on the edge here. A bit dark. So you want to try to keep working with this while this is reasonably wet, so that these things all sort of blend into each other, so that you're not coming up with sharp edges on these corners. You see I'm sort of drawing a vertical spine in here with the shadows, and that's because the way that glass bends, you've got sharp areas, and I still want this sense that it's sort of a ridged shape. There's some sort of dimension to it. Vertical lift up to the slightly darker rim. And you can see that that rim lightened up a little, so we're going to put, again, the darkness just in that rim area. Still need a little darker on the edges. You see that the more that we cover up the white, the darker it ends up getting. It's more saturated, richer in color. But we want it to look organic and not like there's just a dark outline on this shape. Darker along that rim, darker along that rim. But make sure that we leave that stick looking clear. The stick is protruding out of the rocket. Alright, it's getting better. Alright, still need the bottom to be a little darker. I might mix in a little bit of this gray that I had there, just so we get a little bit more of the shadow into this lower area. Alright, add a little bit of that along the edge here. A little bit on the lead edge. Alright, so now we're going to add some more streaky kinds of color across here. Add more texture. A lot of these things will be subtle that you can't really see, but often those are the kinds of little details that help the eye really connect with something as being three-dimensional. And add a little more darkness around this edge. More darkness. Get it out a little so that it's not quite so sharp. More vivid. Do you see how it's sort of taking on a three-dimensional aspect the more that we do this sort of thing? And you can see that sometimes I go out of the line, and I like that kind of thing, like with the color escaping the little flower shapes. I enjoy doing that. Alright, now we're going to get a little more black and go along the very edges here. Give it a little more shadow feel. Again, because it's wet, these colors sort of merge out and blend. gives it a much more organic, natural feel to the way the colors present. And as you make some areas darker, then in comparison the other areas that are lighter stand out more as being lighter. I think I still want it a little darker at the very edges now. So we'll go a little more. And all of this color over here that you see is still completely fine, usable color. You just wet it and it becomes a usable paint. Alright. Put a little bit over here. Over here. And we're just building layers of color, layers of shadow. Layers of lines and so on. A sense of texture. I think I want it to be a little darker in this bottom left area. I want to be cautious. I don't want it to like suddenly be giant black. But if you look at where the light's coming from, which in general for mine is up in here, this area down here would be the area that then fell into the shadow. This area here would be in the shadow of the neck. Get some of the actual green and soften this a little bit so it doesn't look too black. Alright, so I think that's getting more of the bodily shape that I was after. You get the shadows in there to give it a sense that it's three-dimensional. You get some different textures in the bottle so that you get a sense that it's an actual three-dimensional object. And I will give that a chance to dry, I think. So now I'm going to work on the yellow of the bubble. Often I would do a cerulean blue bubble for these kinds of things, but the whole sky is cerulean blue and you really don't want to have blue against blue because that makes it hard to see. So I'm going to go with a pale yellow, and this one here is a lemon yellow. So now we'll go with this. And this area up here should be dry enough now that I can paint the lemon yellow over the top and see the little purple people do not blend, which is good. I want the people to be separate. Got another hair. Get the hair off. Alright, so I just want that light yellow color. Maybe a little darker than that. Alright, so see, some of that yellow was not redly yellow. Some of the red was not quite dry yet and it's seeping up a little into the yellow. So that's why you want to try to let things get fully dry before you paint near them, but it's not too bad of a seep. So I will clean my brush thoroughly. I will squish it so it is now just a damp brush, and then I will dab in there, and then the brush works like a sponge to suck that red back out. Alright, so now the little ferry passenger area is done. The bottle is looking reasonably good. Some little bits of the bottle straight out here, and again, generally I don't mind, but I'm going to try to suck that up, so I do that with a clean brush. And it is just a little damp, and it acts like a sponge. Clean up the color. I'm just making that a little less, I'll call it glaring. So the same thing here. Clean the brush. Squeeze out the water so it's just a little damp. And I will brush in here, which will both pull out that green a little so the green isn't so glaring. And also there was a little bit of white area along here. And I will be able to scrub a little so that I push the blue into the white, because white catches the eye quite strongly. There we go. So in general, oh, there's a little spot over there. So you can just pick at these things for hours and hours. But again, I'm going to use a damp, clean brush. I'm just going to scrub a little at this little white area, and that'll push the blue into the white so that the white doesn't catch your eye as much. White tends to draw the eye, so you want to avoid having big white spots. Alright, so the little connectors should be gray. I have some Payne's gray here. So I'll get a little Payne's gray. And I will paint in here. Maybe I did not get enough. I want to be careful when painting with the darker colors, because if the darker color gets somewhere that you don't want it, it can stain the paper pretty quickly, and that can be hard to get back off again. So generally you want to be cautious that you're putting the darker colors where you want them. Alright, so I will let that dry. Now you take a look at your piece and say, what else do I want there to be in there? I'm generally happy with the way the bottle looks. In the previous one, I did have a couple more brighter highlights in the green. What you can do in cases like that is look for a model image on the web. So in this case, I can just go on the web and look for green 18th century bottles. see if I get anything sort of like what I'm looking for. Alright, so what these images show me is that there tends to be a little white reflective area up in there from the light, and also some of them have the whole bottom area darker, but I don't know that I really want to go too darker. I think I'll do a little darker just in that lower area. Right, so when I was doing my color mixing, I have this area right here which is already a green darker area, and I'm going to just put a little darker up in here. I don't want it to get gray and muddy. That gives a sense of the internal shadows. Alright. Rockets, or the others often have a little shadow to them. You know, it also depends on the lighting. Each of these bottles that you look at can be lit in a very different way, which would cause the shadows and everything to react in a variety of patterns. And you want the very lip to be darker. A little darker around the edge here. Alright, so I think I'm generally happy with the bottle. So now we're going to let this part dry, because next I do want to add a little white highlight. Now normally with watercolors, everything that you do is layer upon layer, and you can see through all the different layers. But if you want to do something white at the very top, use what's called a bleed-proof white, and that sits on the very top for like stars and those sorts of things, and they can be used for little highlights in like a black eye. The black pupil gets a little white highlight, and normally if you put white on top of black, you see through all the layers, so all you'd see is the darker black. But with the bleed proof, it sits right up on top and creates a nice bright spot for you. So in this case, we'll use the white to try to put some little highlights on the glass. And then at the very last step, we're going to do some spattering of color over the whole thing to give it sort of a mystical, happy feel to it. So I'm going to let the rest of the bottle work dry at this point. Clean off my brush. Let it dry sideways. And we will be back in a few minutes when that dries to add the different highlights to it. Alright, I think I'm at the level where I can start adding some little details. So one thing I liked was having a sense that there was writing on the rocket. So I'm going to get some black. Let me just make sure this is dry first. Alright, so the rocket is dry. get a little bit of black on the tip and just do some little sort of scribbling as if there was some writing on here. And some sort of unknown language. Alright, now also I'm going to pick up a little more purple. I generally don't like my people to be monochromatic. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of purple and add a little bit of different color to one or two of these guys. So they're not all quite the same looking. Alright, so I got a little variety in our population of travelers. Now in terms of adding highlights to the rocket, the challenge of working with these bleed-proof whites is once you add it on, it's really hard to get it off. So this could be something where it adds something lovely to your image. Alright, so if the light is coming from up here, then you'll get little spots of light in the areas that are most pointing towards that surface. So again, this is one of these things where you can add something that makes it look wonderful, or you can add something that suddenly feels very unnatural. So we'll give this a shot. We'll do it here. And we'll do a little one. Alright, hopefully that gives some sort of a sense of the brightness of the sun hitting off that spot. And I like that it's sort of merging because you don't want it to be too sharp. Alright, so we'll give that a moment to dry. Alright, so then the final step for this is going to be to spackle it. And I'm going to turn my cardboard sideways. You could probably see some white spackling on my table, because spackling tends to get everywhere. Let me just make sure that's still in the range of the picture. Yep. Alright, so when you put spackling over something, what you're doing is you're getting a brush that's fairly stiff. So like this is a stiff brush. And you get paint on it and then you sit there and flick it on it, so it goes everywhere. So you can't really tell where it's going to end up. So this is a out of your control kind of stage, but it's adds a nice feeling to it if it's like a misty meadow, or you do this for stars in the night sky or something like that. Alright, so for this spackling I'm going to go with the colors that are in the image. So there's going to be some crimson and some of the bottle's green and then some yellow to add some highlight to it. So we're going to start with crimson because that's the most dangerous one because the red is so bright. So we're going to get the brush wet. We're going to go into the crimson. And you can do some test runs on spare paper that you have to make sure that it's spackling the way that you want to. But I'm just going to go whole hog and see what happens. So you're going to draw your finger back and just let it spring out where it is. Alright. Alright, let's see. A little brighter than I was thinking, but again it will fade to a darker color. And what that means is that we need to go more exciting with some of the other colors to balance out that bright red. So I rinse all the red out of my brush. We'll go with orange, I think, because that'll help counterpoint the red. Alright, so get some nice orange on here. now that there's orange in there, I think I'll do more orange against that to, again, balance that crimson that we got in there. And I'm trying to use that same motion of bottom to top to go with the shape of the rocket. There we go. Alright, get some of that verdant green over here. A little more in this top corner. From that giant splotch that got down there. Alright, a little of the fern green. This area still feels a little light to me, and I don't want to put more crimson in there because the crimson got a little bright, so we'll try some of this fern green. There we go. Sort of a counterpoint. Alright, so now there's a sense of excitement and wonder, you know, a sense of like little butterflies floating around and pollen floating around and all those other kinds of things. And you can see where that red came down a little bright in the beginning. Now it feels more muted with the other colors in here. And you can still see, like in the background, the blue sky and the white, which ends up looking like clouds, and those kinds of things. So the spattering ended up being a little heavier in this version than in my initial version. But each type of work that you do ends up having its own feel, and that's okay. That's part of the fun and beauty of art. So I believe that this is pretty set. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this process. Happy to answer questions. Let me know what else I should tackle in future videos. I hope you have a creative afternoon.